Okay, Romans chapter 1, 18 to 25. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them, because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God, nor gave thanks to him, but their thinking became futile, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings, and birds, and animals, and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen.
Thank you, Sally? No. Shalom. Thank you, Callum. It's the right response. With a U as well, never Callum with an O. Not this one anyway. Hark Raider is with an O. Good Morning, Vietnam is a classic but pretty harrowing film. Put your hands up if you've seen Good Morning, Vietnam. In it, the late Robin Williams plays an American forces DJ in Vietnam, and every morning he puts on some of his favorite songs over the radio. And on one morning, he plays the very famous song by Louis Armstrong, What a Wonderful World. How many of you know that song? What a Wonderful World. Great. I see trees are green and skies are blue, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. What a wonderful world. And in the film, the camera pans away from the DJ's studio and shows what's going on outside. And it starts with tranquility in Vietnam, farmers harvesting in the fields, children playing in the forest. But then it turns into a world of chaos and warfare. Napalm, that terrible weapon, flamethrowers destroying whole villages, children screaming in agony, young men gunned down. Yet all the time, the song continues playing. I see trees are green and skies are blue, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. What a wonderful world. And there's a massive disconnect between the words of the song and what we're seeing on the screen. And many of us feel like that today. Something in us is telling that it's an amazing world. If you just look around at the wonder of nature, wow. Or the beauty of human love. There's so much that is good, and yet again and again, what is good has been spoiled. There's so much that is horrible. And the passage that Callum has just read raises an important question. What's gone wrong with the world? And verse 18 says, the wrath of God, and wrath there means anger or judgment of God, is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness. And some of you are thinking, maybe today, that life's great. It's a wonderful world. And others of you are thinking, well, life's just horrible. But the reality is there's something of both of those in our lives. And the question is, what's gone wrong? We're bound to ask the question, and I think deep down there's a sense that it shouldn't be like this. There's so much good, but somehow it's been spoiled. And Paul here is explaining why things have gone wrong. Now, we started looking at the book of Romans last week, and here Paul introduced the reason he was writing to this letter to his friends in Rome, Italy. And he said, I'm writing to you about the gospel, and that is the good news. And he says in verse 16, I'm not ashamed of this gospel, this good news, because it is the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. He says the way to be right with God, the way to know God, is by faith in Jesus Christ. And this is for absolutely everybody. Now, before he explains more about that Jesus died and rose again, that we might be right with God, he spends quite a bit of time, at the end of chapter 1, the whole of chapter 2, and most of chapter 3, explaining why the world is so complicated and broken. And we're going to consider what's gone wrong with the world over the next 2 weeks. And tonight, in particular, one of the applications will be about atheism and some of the questions we need to ask about this viewpoint. So when thinking about what's gone wrong with the world, the first thing the passage tells us is that the universe has the fingerprints of God, but people have rejected the Creator. You see, we all know some truth about God, Paul says. Look at verses 19 and 20. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. When you look at nature or creation, you have a deep down sense that there is something, someone greater. Now, I know there are theories about trying to disprove God, and yet science can't disprove God or prove God. But until the middle of the last century, it was widely believed the universe had always existed. However, since Hubble telescope observed that the universe was expanding, and the discovery in the 1960s of background radiation, it has become the overwhelming consensus of modern science that the universe had a beginning and came into existence with what many scientists say is by the Big Bang. But if the universe had a beginning and matter came into existence, then there must have been something before that. And we've got two options then. Either something or someone which lasted forever, or something that was made, but then someone had to make that, and someone had to make that, and someone had to make that, and eventually you get to something that lasted forever. Now, science implies several things about this Big Bang. Stephen Hawking and others have shown that not only was matter made, but even time and space themselves came into existence with the Big Bang. And the implication then from modern science is that whatever caused the universe to come into an existence would not be physical, but timeless, and therefore changeless and enormously powerful. Also, the exquisite fine-tuning of the universe, whose unchanged physical laws and constants were set at the first moments of the first second of the Big Bang, imply that such a being was unbelievably intelligent. Now, what could be not physical, not timeless, unchanging, enormously powerful, and unbelievably intelligent? Well, the Bible states emphatically, in the beginning, God. You see, you can't prove God by looking at a sunset, but deep down in our hearts, the apostle is saying we know. Or at least if we take the time to get off Facebook and to think deeply, we should know. Because the evidence is there from nature, from creation, that there is a God, and that he's a great God, and that he's worthy of our worship. And yet our reaction is to be ungrateful and stubborn beings. Look at verse 21. For although they knew God, they neither glorified him as God nor gave thanks to him. I mean, that's a little bit strange, isn't it? When you think about what is fundamentally wrong with the world. Isn't verse 21 saying it's because we didn't say thank you? I mean, is the Apostle Paul saying if we had better table manners, the terrors of the world would be solved? Well, he's saying it's more than table manners. Because when we say thank you, we are acknowledging our dependence on someone. That they've given us something that we need. Whereas if we don't acknowledge the source of knowledge or a resource, I mean, we can claim that we've come up with a solution ourselves, can't we? That we can decide what is right and wrong because we are self-sufficient. And people love to come up with elaborate theories to try and disprove God, ultimately because they want to be self-sufficient and the center of the universe. I don't need God. So we suppress the truth, thinking we can work out everything by ourselves. But can we? That's the first step in Paul's argument. What's gone wrong with the world? Well, he says God's fingerprints are everywhere. So everybody knows some truth about God, yet we are ungrateful and stubborn. But if we reject the God of the Bible, we don't stop worshiping because we are longing as human beings for purpose and identity and security. And so his second point is everyone worships something. Look from verse 22. Although they claimed to be wise, they became fools, and they exchanged the glory of God, the glory of the immortal God, for images made to look like a mortal human being, and birds and animals and reptiles. Therefore God gave them over in the sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. People worshipped created things rather than the Creator. Now notice he says there are only two options. You can either worship the Creator or a created thing. There's no possibility of not worshiping or serving anything, despite the fact that lots of people try and claim that they don't worship or serve anything. My friends, it's impossible. Why? Well, because many philosophers have come to the conclusion that human beings are purpose beings. In other words, we have to live for something. Human beings don't just exist. They have to live for something. Something has to capture your imagination. Something has to grab the deepest longings of your heart. Something has to be the resting place of your greatest hopes. Every human being has to look deep in their heart, semi-consciously or consciously, and say, if I have that, then my life is worthwhile. I'll be satisfied. Then I'll have meaning in life, and I'll know that I'm a somebody. If I have that. And whatever that is, wherever your hopes are, that's what you worship. Because that is what worship is. And therefore there is the inevitability of idolatry. Because none of us naturally worship the true God. We may have a belief in God that he's there, as Matt shared earlier about his childhood. But we often give our hearts to something else, whether it is money or acclaim, or human approval, or sex, or comfort, or rule keeping, or power, or control. You see, idols can be metal, they can be physical, but more often than not, they are mental. Attitudes and affections that may be good in themselves, But when we lift them so high that they are our greatest affection, we've made them great. And my friends, if you love anything more than God, if you find hope and rest in anything other than the goodness and the power of God, then that is an idol. If your imagination is captured by anything other than the greatness of God, that is an idol. If your value is rooted in anything other than the love and kindness of God, that is an idol. If you love anything more than God, and naturally we all do, then we are looking at a created thing for what only God can possibly give you. As Rachel said earlier, Jesus talks a lot about money. And when he talks about idols, though money in itself is not an idol, but the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. But having money as an idol can be displayed in many ways. For some, even though they wear ordinary clothes and live a simple lifestyle, money is an idol for them because they save their money so that they can have control. And that is their idol, control. I don't need anyone. I can do everything myself because I've got lots of money in the bank. Instead of prayer or God, it's money. And they can't give it away. They can't share it with those in need because of the idolatry of control. I have control of my life. Other people take the money and they spend it on themselves. You can see it. They look glamorous and they live in beautiful places and they hang out with powerful people. Why? Well, because for them, money is the way of climbing the ladder. Money is the way of getting human approval. And if I have human approval, then I know who I am. Then I feel significant and secure. And so there are idols within idols. Anything, in one sense, can be an idol. And everyone in this room, me included, is a factory of idol making. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, when you gave your life to Christ, as Matthew talked about, when you became convinced that Jesus was real and the Lord, then the back of those idols were broken. Though our hearts are still drawn to them, we become captivated by a better vision, by something greater. But I need to ask you, do you know what your idols are? Have you examined your heart? Do you know what your weakness is? Because Paul says, if you don't, you haven't begun to understand yourself and how to be fulfilled in your life. And maybe life is okay now with the idols that you have. But in the bad times, you see your idols won't satisfy, won't be able to help you, and they will cause anger and bitterness and deep reflection. And you won't know where to go. My friends, then it is dangerously late. I have an illustration for us. At the moment, we are doing some renovations on our house. And we are doing the installation of our ceiling. This is Celotex. Now, this is very strong and very good at keeping houses warm. But imagine this is your idol. It's hard. But with idols, you base your life on them. But the problem is, when you put too much weight on something, it will crack and it will break. And what are you going to base your life on then? What's wrong with the world? Firstly, Even though nature and the universe point to something greater, we have suppressed the truth and rejected God. And then secondly, because we are all worshippers, we have replaced God as the one to worship for things which are created and don't satisfy and can't stand up to the weight. So how does God show his disapproval and anger against our rejection of him and choosing other things? Well, this may seem unusual, it is by answering our prayers and giving us what we want. It was Oscar Wilde who said, "When the gods wish to punish us, they answer our prayers." Oscar Wilde knew when our hearts got the thing they most wanted, it was the worst possible thing because our hearts are disordered. They have consuming desires which make things which can be good in themselves into something great, so that they become gods which don't satisfy and can't carry the weight we put on them. And the worst thing God can possibly do is to give us what we want. And there's a phrase which comes 3 times which shows us this. The phrase, God gave them over. Verse 24, God gave them over in their sinful desires. Verse 26, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Halfway through verse 28, so God gave them over to a depraved mind. What does it mean that God gave us over? Well, suppose you're a dad or a mum and your son gets into bad ways and he develops a drug habit and becomes addicted. And the result is he's short of money all the time. And so he steals from the family home. And you discover. And you're very angry. But the parent says, well, I love you. And I'll sort this out. The parent says to the child, I forgive you. But then the child carries on doing it. And more than that, he actually steals from the next door neighbor. A next door neighbor is going to report him to the police. But the parent says, oh, no, don't do that. I'll pay the debt. I'll sort it out. But this carries on. And he steals more from other family members and more neighbors. And after a while, the father gives him over. Now, he's not saying, I don't love you anymore, but he's given him up to the consequences of the child's behavior. The parent is not going to keep on bailing the child out. He's done it so many times for so many years. And so next time the child steals, he has to face the consequences of court and prison. And so God's judgment is that he doesn't intervene. He allows us to experience the consequences of the choices we've made. The parent at that point is not hitting their son. His disapproval and anger is seen by withdrawing his protection and enabling his child to go his own way. And when we turn away from God and reject the truth about the Creator and replace him with idols that we've made, that has consequences on how we behave. And we can see it all around us. What does it look like? We'll look at verse 25. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator. Here Paul says that God gave them over to serve created things. And when you have an idol, you must have it. You cannot live without it. You're focused on it. You become like an animal living on instinct, or like a robot that is programmed to act a certain way. And the word serve there in verse 25 can be translated as a slave or as an addict, because idolatry is a form of spiritual addiction. And how does this work itself out? We'll look at the final description of the implications of God giving us over to our desires. Look at verse 28, where he gave them over to a wicked and corrupt thinking, a depraved mind, which leads to actions. Look at verse 29, where he gave them over to every kind of wickedness and evil and greed and depravity, or backstabbing, as the Message translation puts it. I'll pick out some others. They are full of strife and deceit and gossip. They are bullies and mean-spirited. They are arrogant and boastful. They invent ways of doing evil. They ignore their parents when they get in the way. They are cruel and cold-blooded. Anyone who is greedy here? Any backstabbers? Any gossips? Any people who are mean-spirited or cruel? My friend, what's wrong with the world? I am. We are. Because we have broken God's morals. We have exchanged God's values for doing what is right in our own eyes. And that is the second problem with atheism. That atheism struggle to make a case for ultimate right and wrong. Now, what I'm not saying is that atheists cannot devise a moral code or live better lives than Christians. On the contrary, Christians are moral failures by definition. You cannot become a Christian without realizing that. No, the issue is this: that in an atheistic perspective, you have no objective basis to call anything ultimately good or evil. Atheistic morality is like the rules of a sports club, where men must wear jackets and women must wear skirts. There is nothing objectively wrong in eating without a jacket. Another club down the road might relax the rule about jackets and allow women to wear trousers. These are homemade human rules for the mutual benefit of members at a particular time, place, and culture. They are open for review at any point, depending on local demand. Now, atheists may argue that God must have chosen an equally random set of rules, but that is not so. Christians understand morality to flow directly from God's essential being and who he is. God is a holy God, which means he is good, and he is loving, and he is just, and he is kind, and he is faithful. Right and wrong in the world flow from the essential qualities of his character. And without that objective basis for justice and goodness, morality would just be a human contract. There will be no ultimate justice, and nothing would be objectively wrong in itself. But our whole system of law and ethics assumes that is objective reality on good and evil. That it was objectively wrong to murder Joe Cox, the MP. That it was objectively wrong to traffic and rape girls as young as 12 in Peterborough and Rochdale in recent years. Christians believe such things are ultimately wrong because they defy the very character of who God is. So the logic is this: if God does not exist, objective morals do not exist. But evil does exist. Rape, murder, child abuse are objectively wrong. So if that is true, then God does exist, and we should worship him. So, from this passage, what hope is there? Well, to be honest, very little. And that's because it's part of a letter, and we'll hear more of that in the coming weeks. But there is a glimpse. At the end of verse 25, the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. God is to be ever praised, yes, because he is the Creator, so we should be thankful. Yes, because he is perfect in being loving and fair and just. And so that's why we have values. But also because he doesn't treat us as we deserve and gives us a way back to him. You see, the God who gave us over to our warped desires, also according to Romans chapter 8:32, gave up his Son for us all to die and take the wrath, the judgment, the anger that we deserve. And just in case you think it's just the Father sending the Son and the Son didn't want to go, Ephesians 5:25 says Jesus loved the church. He loved us. And there's the phrase, gave himself up for us, gave himself over for us. And my friends, when you're so moved by his love for you and consumed by his love for you, you have strength to overcome whatever the world throws at you. Because you know the one who is to be forever praised and who has given up his life for you. Let's reflect on what God has said to us, and then we're going to worship him in song. Let's have a moment of quiet. Father God, we thank you for this beautiful world, and would you forgive us when we've done things to harm it, but also behind the created, there is a creator. And thank you that you've stepped into this world by sending Jesus to live and die at the hands that he had created. And thank you that he rose again so we can worship him as a risen Savior. Amen.